The clock on my nightstand read 6:42 a.m. when the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling somewhere it shouldn't be finally pulled me from a shallow sleep. It wasn't the familiar rumble of the county snowplow or the garbage truck. This was a lower, more aggressive growl. I lay there for a moment, listening, letting the sound place itself. It was close. Too close. It was down by the workshop. I swung my legs out of bed, the old floorboards cool beneath my feet, and pulled on a pair of jeans and a thick flannel shirt. I didn't rush. Rushing has never been my way. I walked to the kitchen, started the coffee maker, and stood at the window that overlooks the back portion of my property. And there it was. A small, yellow backhoe, its hydraulic arm poised like some prehistoric insect, was parked on the gravel path not 20 feet from the workshop my late wife and I had built with our own hands. A man in a hard hat was talking to a woman. I knew the woman. Her name was Brenda McMillan. She was the president of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association. She was pointing at the workshop, her gestures sharp and emphatic. The man with her, presumably the contractor, nodded along, his face a mask of professional deference. I watched as he took a step toward the building and kicked one of the foundation stones with the toe of his steel-capped boot. Brenda smiled, a thin, satisfied line. I poured my coffee into a heavy ceramic mug, the one Eleanor had made in a pottery class years ago, its familiar weight a comfort in my hand. Then, I opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The morning air was crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, sipping my coffee, and watched them. It took them a full minute to notice me. Brenda's back was to me, but the contractor saw me over her shoulder. His eyes widened slightly, and he stopped nodding. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Brenda, sensing the shift in his attention, turned. When she saw me, her smile didn't falter. In fact, it widened. It was the kind of smile that wasn't meant to convey warmth, but ownership. "Arthur," she called out, her voice carrying easily in the still morning air. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed. "Good. You're up. I was hoping to have this done before it disturbed you, but since you're here, you can watch." I took another slow sip of my coffee. I let the silence hang there. She hated silence she didn't control. Her smile tightened at the edges. "This eyesore," she said, gesturing dismissively at the workshop, "is finally coming down. It's a clear violation of Article 7, Section 4 of the Community Bylaws. The board voted unanimously. You were sent the notices." I remained silent. I had, of course, received the notices. I had every single one of them, filed neatly in a gray, letter-sized accordion folder in my office. Each one was sent by standard mail, not certified. An amateur mistake. "The crew is here to demolish it and haul away the debris," she continued, her voice gaining a sharp, didactic edge. "The association will, of course, be billing you for the cost of the removal, plus the accumulated fines for non-compliance. It's a shame it had to come to this, Arthur, but rules are rules. They protect our property values." The contractor shifted his weight, looking from her to me, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was a tool, but he was a tool that was starting to suspect he was being used to strip the wrong bolt. I finally lowered my mug and looked directly at Brenda. My voice, when it came out, was quiet, devoid of anger. It was the voice I used for decades in depositions. "Brenda," I said, my tone perfectly level, "what you are about to do is a crime. Specifically, it is criminal trespass and attempted destruction of private property. That man with you is about to become an accomplice." She laughed. It was a short, barking sound. "Don't be ridiculous, Arthur. This is HOA property. The Architectural Review Committee has full authority here. We've been over this. You've been properly notified for 3 months. I took a step forward, to the edge of the porch. I let my eyes drift from her to the backhoe, then to the small, orange survey stake I had driven into the ground the previous evening. A stake she had clearly not noticed, or not understood. It was almost touching the front tire of the machine. No, Brenda, I said, still quiet. You haven't been over this. You've just been talking. Now I'm talking. If that man starts that machine, I will not sue the HOA. I will sue you personally, and I will sue his company. And when I am done, I will file a report with the sheriff's department and press for criminal charges. Your personal assets, not the HOA's insurance, will be attached. I will own your house. I will own his backhoe. The contractor took a half step back. Brenda's face for the first time lost its smug certainty. It was replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. She was a petty tyrant who had just been told no in a language she wasn't used to hearing. She was used to tears, to shouting, to fearful compliance. She wasn't used to calm, procedural certainty. She had no idea who I was. She had no idea what I did for a living for 45 years. She had no idea that for the past 6 months, I had been preparing for this exact moment. She had no idea that she hadn't just brought a backhoe to a fight. She had brought her entire, flimsy, fraudulent world to my doorstep, and I was about to dismantle it, piece by documented piece. She had no idea, but before I tell you what happened next, I should probably explain. You have to understand that this wasn't about a workshop. It was never about the workshop. It was about the slow, creeping erosion of order, and one woman's absolute belief that her will was a substitute for the law. My name is Arthur Vance. I'm a retired civil engineer. For the better part of my career, I worked for a large firm that specialized in land development. I didn't just design roads and drainage systems. I was the man they sent in to do the due diligence. I read the fine print. I spent months at a time in dusty county courthouses, poring over plat maps from the 19th century, tracing title histories, and identifying ancient easements and forgotten rights of way. My job was to understand the bones of a piece of land. I had to know on paper exactly where every line was, who owned what, and what the rules were. Not the rules someone wished existed, but the ones that were legally filed and recorded. For me, a deed or a survey plat was a sacred text. It was a map of reality. My entire professional life was built on the foundation that documents matter more than opinions. My wife Eleanor and I bought this property 30 years ago. It was a 5-acre lot at the very end of a planned community called Whispering Pines Estates. We chose it because it was bordered on 2 sides by national forest land. It was private, quiet. The developer was a man I'd worked with before, and he showed me the master plan. I reviewed the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and Rs, before we even made an offer. They were standard, reasonable things. No junk cars in the yard, keep your lawn mowed, no commercial businesses. Things designed to maintain a baseline of civility. We could live with that. For 25 years we did. The HOA was a formality. We paid our dues, received a newsletter twice a year, and were left alone. It was a community of neighbors, not subjects. Eleanor passed away 5 years ago. The quiet of the house became a different kind of quiet after that. Louder somehow. The workshop was one of the last things we designed together. It was a small, handsome building, built with timber from this very property, with a stone foundation and a dark green metal roof. It was where I kept my tools, my drafting table, and the half-finished projects we'd always meant to get to. Every permit was pulled. Every inspection was passed. It was built to last a century, a quiet monument to a shared life. It sat a good 200 feet from the house, nestled in a stand of old-growth pines. On paper, it was perfect. Then, 2 years ago, Brenda McMillan was elected president of the HOA board. She was a relative newcomer, having moved in about a year prior. She was charismatic, in a sharp-edged way, and she spoke with great passion about declining property values and the need for stricter enforcement. People who were too busy to pay attention, or who were swayed by her confident pronouncements, voted for her. And with that small mandate, she began her reign. It started small, notices about trash cans being left out for more than 12 hours. Rulings on the precise shade of beige that was acceptable for trim paint. Fines for unapproved landscape modifications, which could mean anything, From planting a rose bush to putting up a bird feeder, she and her hand-picked Architectural Review Committee, or ARC, would walk the neighborhood with clipboards, looking for infractions. They were bullies armed with a 3-ring binder. I watched it all. I didn't say anything. When I received a notice that the gravel on my driveway was an unapproved surface, I paid the $25 fine. I didn't argue. I just paid it. And I kept the receipt. I kept the notice. I scanned them both and saved them to a folder on my computer desktop. The folder was labeled simply HOA. That was the first entry. Over the next 18 months, that folder grew. George, my neighbor to the east, a retired school teacher in his late 70s, was fined because his garden hose wasn't coiled in a circular, aesthetically pleasing manner. He paid it. I saw the notice in his trash can. A young couple down the street was ordered to remove a child's swing set because it was visible from the road and constituted an unauthorized permanent structure. They fought it, briefly, at a board meeting. Brenda, I was told, humiliated them, questioning their commitment to the community and their neighbors' financial well-being. They took the swing set down the next day. The fines, the threats, the public shamings, it was a pattern. She was consolidating power through fear and the weaponization of ambiguity in the CC and Rs. Her attention turned to my workshop 6 months before that morning with the backhoe. The first notice arrived by regular mail. It was a form letter stating that an unpermitted outbuilding had been identified on my property and that it was in violation of aesthetic guidelines. It demanded the submission of plans and a request for retroactive approval. It was signed by Brenda as president. I did not respond. I knew the building was fully permitted by the county. I also knew the original CC and Rs had no specific prohibitions on a structure of its kind, provided it was well maintained. Her aesthetic guidelines were a document she and her committee had drafted and distributed themselves, without a formal vote of the community to amend the CC and Rs, a process which required a 2/3 majority. On paper, her guidelines were meaningless. They were the equivalent of a strongly worded blog post. The second notice arrived a month later. This one was more aggressive. It cited Article 7, Section 4, the same section she'd mentioned that morning. It claimed this section gave the ARC blanket authority over all structures. It imposed a $100 fine and stated your fines would double every 30 days. I read Article 7, Section 4. I had a copy of the original covenants, the one I'd signed at closing 30 years ago. The section stated the ARC had authority over the initial construction of any dwelling or major landscaping feature. It said nothing about pre-existing structures, nor did it grant retroactive power. Furthermore, my workshop wasn't a dwelling. Her interpretation was a willful, self-serving fiction. I paid the fine. I kept the receipt. I added the letter and the canceled check to my folder. I kept the receipts, always. A month after that, a third notice. The fine was now $200. It included a new threat. If the violation was not cured within 30 days, the association would take action to cure the violation on the member's behalf and bill the member for the cost. This was her declaration of war. She was claiming the right to come onto my property and destroy my building. This was the moment I stopped being a passive observer and went back to my desk to get to work. This was my field. This was my world. For Brenda, the HOA was a stage for her to perform on. For me, it was a legal entity governed by a contract I had signed. A contract is a machine made of words. You have to know how the machine works. She was just banging on the casing with a hammer. I was about to pull out the schematics, and the first thing I did was send a formal, written warning. It wasn't an angry letter. It was a cold, procedural document. I drafted it like a legal brief. I sent it via certified mail, with a return receipt requested, to the HOA's official mailing address, which was a post office box. I also sent a copy directly to Brenda's home address, also certified. In the letter I calmly and methodically dismantled her position. I cited the exact language of the original CC and Rs from 1988. I included a photocopy of the relevant page, with the key phrases highlighted. I pointed out that her authority as president and the ARC's authority were strictly limited by that document. I explained that their self-published aesthetic guidelines had no legal force, as they had not been adopted via the amendment process outlined in the covenants themselves. I included a copy of the county-approved building permit for the workshop, dated 12 years prior. I included a copy of the final inspection report. I concluded by stating that my property was in full compliance with the governing legal documents of the association. Finally, I stated in clear and unambiguous terms that any attempt by her or any agent of the HOA to enter my property for the purpose of removing the structure would be considered criminal trespass, and that I would pursue all available legal remedies, both civil and criminal. I kept a copy of the letter. I kept the postal receipts for the certified mail. A week later, the 2 green signature cards came back in the mail. One was signed by Brenda McMillan. The other was signed by the post office clerk for the HOA's box. She had received it. She was officially on notice. On paper, my position was now formally documented. Her response was silence. The fines, however, kept coming. $400, $800. I didn't pay these. The first 2 payments were to establish a pattern of my attempting to comply in good faith. Now, we were in a different phase. Her response to my letter came not in writing, but in person, at the next board meeting. George, my neighbor, told me all about it. He said she held up my certified letter and mocked it. Mr. Vance sent us a very serious letter, full of big words, she'd apparently said to the assembled board members, a small group of her loyalists. He thinks he's a lawyer. He thinks he can intimidate us with paperwork. She then, according to George, tore the letter in half and dropped it into the trash can. We will not be intimidated, she announced. The demolition is scheduled for April. She had no idea that tearing up the letter didn't make it go away. It only created a witness to her contempt for a formal legal warning. That was when I began to seriously work the problem. I retreated to my office. For 2 days I did nothing but assemble my case. I pulled out the original title insurance policy for my property. I downloaded the tax records from the county assessor's website. I printed out every email, every notice, every scanned check from the HOA folder. I arranged them in chronological order in a heavy-duty 3-ring binder. Each document was placed in a clear plastic sleeve. I created a table of contents. It was a habit from my old job. When you go into a fight, you bring the binder. You bring all the paper. The person with the best organized paper usually wins. But I knew I needed more. Her arrogance was so profound, I suspected her sloppiness might run deeper than just misinterpreting the covenants. I needed to go back to the source. I needed to look at the bones of the land itself. So I called David. David was my partner at the firm for 20 years. He was a licensed surveyor, one of the best. He was retired too, but like me, he never really stopped being what he was. Arthur, he said, his voice warm over the phone, to what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you're finally ready to sell that slice of heaven and move into a condo. Not exactly, David, I said. I need a favor. I need you to pull the original subdivision plat for Whispering Pines Estates, the final, recorded version from '88, and any subsequent filings or amendments related to common areas or easements. There was a pause. Everything all right? He asked. This sounds like work. I have a small issue with our homeowners association, I said. I just want to double-check the original lines. Ah, he said, a world of understanding in that single syllable. An HOA issue. Say no more. I'll see what I can dig up from the county's digital archives. It'll be more accurate than the copies they give out. I'll call you back. He called back 2 hours later. Arthur, he said, and his voice was different. It had a note of professional excitement in it. The voice of a man who's found something unexpected on a map. You're not going to believe this? Are you sitting down? I'm at my desk, I said. Okay. I'm looking at the recorded plat map. The one the developer filed with the county that legally created the subdivision. It's all here. the lots, the roads, the common areas. But there's an anomaly on your lot. Lot 27. I felt a prickle of anticipation. Go on. There's a section at the very back of your property, a rectangle about 100 feet deep by 200 feet wide, that's shaded differently. There's a note in the legend. It's designated as a future development parcel, retained by grantor. It was never incorporated into the Whispering Pines Estate's common property. It looks like the developer held it back, maybe for a future phase that never happened. When you bought Lot 27, he must have bundled that parcel into your deed. It's not part of the HOA. It was never legally made part of the HOA. I was silent for a moment, processing. I looked at the survey map I had on my own wall. I walked over to it and traced the lines with my finger. I could see the area he was talking about. It was exactly where my workshop was. David, I said slowly, are you telling me the HOA has no jurisdiction over that parcel at all? On paper, he said. That's what I'm telling you. It's legally distinct. It's part of your property, but it's not part of the property governed by the CC of Whispering Pines Estates. They have as much authority back there as they do on the moon. Why? What's on that parcel? I looked out my window at the workshop, its green roof solid and reassuring among the trees. A slow smile spread across my face. David, I said, that's where the eyesore is. This was it. This was the bombshell. Brenda's entire case was predicated on her authority over my land. But she had authority over Lot 27 of Whispering Pines Estates. She had no authority over the separate, adjacent parcel described in my deed, the parcel where the workshop stood. She had been fining me, threatening me, and was now planning to demolish a building on a piece of land she had absolutely no legal connection to. She had no idea. I had David email me a high-resolution, certified copy of the plat map. I printed it out on a large format plotter I still kept in my office. I then pulled my original deed, and there it was, clear as day, in the legal description. All of Lot 27 of the Whispering Pines Estate subdivision, as recorded in Plat Book 62, page 14 of the county records, together with that certain parcel of land described in Exhibit B, attached hereto. Exhibit B described the retained parcel by meets and bounds. It was all there. It had always been there. I just hadn't needed to look. Not until now. This changed everything. This elevated her actions from an overreach of HOA authority to simple, straightforward trespass. I added the plat map and a highlighted copy of my deed to the binder. It was now complete. The final escalation came a week before the scheduled demolition. It was a Saturday morning. I was outside cleaning my gutters when a sheriff's department cruiser pulled into my driveway. A young deputy, his name tag read Miller, got out of the car. He looked uncomfortable. Brenda was right behind him in her pristine luxury SUV. She got out and strode toward him, a folder in her hand. She was performing again, this time for an audience in uniform. "Deputy, thank you for coming," she said, her voice filled with strained reasonableness. "This is the property I was telling you about. This man, Arthur Vance, has been sent numerous violation notices and has become, well, increasingly belligerent. We have a work crew scheduled to resolve a serious covenant violation next week, and I'm concerned for their safety. He's made threats." Deputy Miller looked from her to me, standing on my ladder. I calmly finished clearing a clump of pine needles, closed the gutter guard, and climbed down. I didn't rush. I walked over to them, wiping my hands on a rag. "Mr. Vance?" the deputy asked. "I am," I said. "Ma'am, what specific threats did he make?" Miller asked, turning to Brenda. He had his hand resting near his notepad, not his weapon. A good sign. He was here to document, not to intimidate. "He threatened to take my house," she said, her voice rising with practiced indignation. "He threatened the contractor. He said he'd have us arrested. It's all right here in my report." She thrust her folder at him. It was a flimsy two-pocket folder with a few loose papers in it. It was an amateur's attempt at documentation. The deputy took the folder but didn't open it. He looked at me. Sir, is this true? Did you threaten this woman? I looked him in the eye. No, Deputy, I said calmly. I did not threaten her. I informed her of the legal consequences of her intended actions. There is a difference. I told her that if she and a crew came onto my private property to destroy my building, I would use the legal system to hold them accountable. That is not a threat. It is a statement of fact, Brenda scoffed. He's playing with words, officer. This is HOA common property, and he's refusing to comply with the rules. And we have every right to be here. Deputy, I said, my voice still level and low. May I show you something? He nodded. Go ahead. I walked into my house and came back out a moment later with my binder. It was heavy and thick, nearly 4 inches of neatly organized paper. Brenda's eyes widened slightly when she saw it. This was not in her script. I opened it to the first page, the table of contents. Then I flipped to tab A. This is my deed to this property, Deputy, I said, pointing to the highlighted legal description. And this, I said, flipping to tab B, is the official recorded plat map for the Whispering Pines Estates subdivision, certified by the county clerk's office. I unfolded the large map. As you can see, my property consists of 2 legally distinct parcels. There is Lot 27, which is part of the HOA, and there is this parcel here at the back, which is not. The workshop she intends to demolish is located entirely on the parcel that the HOA has no jurisdiction over. Her presence there, and especially the presence of a demolition crew, would constitute criminal trespass. Deputy Miller leaned in and looked at the map. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. He could read a map. He traced the lines with his finger, then looked at the legal description on the deed. He looked over my shoulder at the workshop, then and back at the map. He saw it. The gears were turning. Furthermore, I continued, flipping to tab C, this is a copy of a certified letter I sent to Miss McMillan and the HOA board 6 weeks ago, explaining this situation in detail. And these, I said, showing him the green signature cards, are the receipts proving she received it. She is not acting out of ignorance, Deputy. She is acting with full knowledge that she has no legal authority. That is called intent. Brenda's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. Confusion, anger, and for the first time a flicker of genuine fear. Her performance had collapsed in the face of quiet, organized reality. She had brought a story to a fight with a man who had brought a library. This is fake, she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the plat map. He printed this himself. It's fraudulent. Deputy Miller looked at the county certification stamp on the corner of the map. He looked at the official recording numbers. He looked back at Brenda, and his expression was now one of weary professionalism. He had seen this kind of thing before. The blustering, entitled citizen who believes reality should bend to their will. Ma'am, he said, his voice polite but firm, this appears to be an official county document. This is a civil matter, a property dispute. It's not a law enforcement issue at this time. However, he said, turning to me, I do have to file a report. Can you please state for the record exactly what you said to Miss McMillan? I nodded. Of course. For the record, my name is Arthur Vance. I am the legal owner of this property. I informed Miss McMillan that if she or any agent acting on her behalf enters the parcel of land described in Exhibit B of my deed for the purpose of demolishing the structure located thereupon, I will pursue all available civil remedies for damages, and I will cooperate with the Sheriff's Department in the pursuit of any applicable criminal charges, including, but not limited to, trespass and destruction of property. Miller wrote everything down, word for word. He then turned to Brenda. Ma'am, given the documents Mr. Vance has presented, I would strongly advise you and your contractor not to enter that part of the property until you have consulted with an attorney and clarified this matter in court. If you proceed and he is correct, you could be held liable. Do you understand? She stood there, speechless, her flimsy folder hanging limp at her side. She just nodded, her jaw tight. The deputy handed her back her folder, gave me a crisp nod, and returned to his car. As he drove away, Brenda glared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred that was almost pure. She had been publicly contradicted. The neutral authority she had summoned had not validated her. It had validated me. She got in her car and sped away, kicking up a cloud of gravel. I knew it wasn't over. She was too proud, too invested to back down. This had just pushed her to the next level of desperation. I picked up my binder, went back inside, and waited for the other shoe to drop. It dropped 2 days later. That's when the first ally appeared. I was in my office reviewing my notes when I heard a hesitant knock on my front door. It was George, my neighbor. He was holding a small, brown paper bag, and he looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected to be seen. "Arthur," he said, his voice low. "Can I come in for a minute?" "Of course, George," I said, holding the door open. He scurried inside, and I led him to the kitchen. I poured him a glass of water. His hand was trembling slightly as he took it. "I saw the sheriff here on Saturday," he said. "I saw her drive off. She looked angry." "She was," I confirmed. George took a deep breath. "Arthur, I've lived here for 40 years. This used to be a good place. Quiet, neighborly. She's turned it into her own little kingdom. I've been afraid to say anything. We all have. She's vindictive. But what you're doing, standing up to her, it's given some of us courage." He reached into the paper bag and pulled out a small, digital audio recorder. "I'm on the Architectural Review Committee," he said, almost whispering. "She appointed me. I think she thought I'd be a rubber stamp. I go to the meetings. I listen. After she got your certified letter, there was a special closed-door session. Just her, me, and 2 others. She told us to ignore it. She said you were bluffing. I recorded it." He pushed the recorder across the table to me. "She admits it, Arthur. She admits she knows the demolition might not be strictly by the book." Those were her words. She said, and I quote, "Even if we're on shaky ground, the cost to fight us in court will be more than he's willing to pay. We'll bury him in legal fees. He'll give up. She bullies everyone. She thinks she can bully you." I looked at the small, gray device. It was a piece of evidence I never could have obtained myself. It was proof of malice. It demonstrated that her actions weren't a mistake or a misinterpretation. They were a deliberate, bad faith strategy to use the HOA's financial resources to intimidate a homeowner into submission. It was a game changer. "George," I said, my voice thick with a gratitude I rarely feel. "You have no idea how important this is, but you could be putting yourself at risk. She'll retaliate." "Let her," he said, a new firmness in his voice. "I'm 78 years old. My house is paid for. What's she going to do? Fine me for the color of my petunias? It's time this ended. I'll testify to it too. I'll swear that it's her voice and that it's an accurate recording of the meeting." I put the recorder in a labeled evidence bag and placed it in my safe. The coalition was beginning to form. People were tired of being afraid. The next day, I received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line was simply, "For your information." Attached was a PDF document. It was a copy of an invoice and a contract from the demolition company Brenda had hired. The contract was for $10,000, and it had been signed by Brenda on behalf of the HOA. But the invoice was dated 2 weeks before the board meeting where the demolition was supposedly approved. She had hired the crew before she even had the board's authorization. The email's text was short. The board never voted to approve this specific contract. She signed it unilaterally. Check the meeting minutes. A concerned neighbor. I knew immediately who it was from. It had to be Susan, the HOA treasurer. She was a retired accountant, a stickler for rules and process. I knew she and Brenda had clashed before over sloppy bookkeeping. Brenda's dictatorial style must have finally pushed her over the edge. I cross-referenced the date on the contract with the official minutes from the last 2 board meetings, which were posted on the HOA website. The concerned neighbor was right. There was no vote authorizing an expenditure of $10,000 to that specific company. Brenda had acted on her own, in violation of the bylaws that required board approval for any expenditure over $1,000. She had single-handedly exposed the entire association to a massive financial liability. My binder was getting heavier. I now had proof of intent, proof of malice, and proof of financial misconduct. Brenda's final desperate move came in the form of an overnight package from a law firm I'd never heard of. It was a cease and desist letter, combined with a notice of a lawsuit for slander and a temporary restraining order hearing. She was suing me. She claimed I had harassed and slandered her to the sheriff's deputy, and she was seeking an emergency order to prevent me from coming within 500 feet of her, or communicating with the HOA board in any way. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, the day before the planned demolition. It was a classic bully tactic. A slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed to intimidate and silence a critic by burying them in legal costs. She was trying to get a judge to gag me before I could present my evidence. She had no idea how badly this would backfire. On paper, her lawsuit was a gift. It moved our fight from the informal, kangaroo court setting of an HOA meeting into a real court of law, a place with rules of evidence and consequences for perjury. She had just invited me to play the game on my home field. The day of the hearing arrived. It was held in a small, sterile courtroom at the county courthouse. I didn't hire a lawyer. Representing myself was a calculated risk, but I knew the facts and the documents better than anyone. I arrived early, dressed in a simple gray suit. I had my binder with me, sitting on the table like a stone tablet. Brenda was there with her lawyer, a young, slick-looking man in a suit that was too expensive for his experience level. She was dressed for a funeral, in all black, and she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she conferred with him, a performance for the judge. Several of her board members were in the gallery to support her, but on the other side of the aisle sat George and Susan. They had come on their own. My coalition. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Carmichael, called the case. Brenda's lawyer went first. He launched into a dramatic retelling of the events, painting me as an unstable, aggressive old man who had threatened a law-abiding public servant. He described Brenda as a dedicated volunteer, working thanklessly to protect the community's property values, who was now living in fear. He presented her flimsy folder of unpaid, fine notices as evidence of my non-compliance. It was a good story. It just wasn't true. When he was finished, the judge looked at me. "Mr. Vance, your response." I stood up and walked to the podium. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use dramatic language. I just opened my binder. "Your Honor," I began, "my name is Arthur Vance. I am a retired civil engineer. For 45 years my job was to read and understand documents like these." I patted the binder. "What Miss McMillan's counsel has just presented is a narrative. I would like to present you with the facts." For the next 20 minutes I walked the judge through the evidence, piece by piece. I didn't argue or opine. I let the documents speak for themselves. I started with the deed and the plat map, explaining the jurisdictional issue. I showed her the certified mail receipts, proving Brenda was aware of the issue long before she called the sheriff. I presented the official county permits for the workshop. "This is not an unpermitted structure, Your Honor," I said. "It is a fully legal building on private property that is not subject to the HOA's governance." Then I moved on. "Miss McMillan claims I slandered her to Deputy Miller. Deputy Miller filed a report of the incident. I have a copy here obtained through a public records request." I placed it on the podium. "It contains my full, verbatim statement, which I will read for you." I read the calm, procedural statement I had given Miller. "As you can see, Your Honor, there was no slander. There was no threat. There was a clear factual statement of my legal intentions. Miss McMillan is not suing me for what I said. She is suing me for what the law is." The judge was looking at Brenda's lawyer, her expression unreadable. His confident smirk had vanished. "Furthermore, Your Honor, Miss McMillan's lawsuit claims she is acting on behalf of the HOA in her official capacity. However, I have here a contract she signed with a demolition company for $10,000. I produced the document Susan had sent me. And I have the minutes from the last several HOA board meetings. There is no record of the board approving this expenditure, which is a violation of their own bylaws. She is not acting on behalf of the HOA. She is acting on her own. Brenda was staring at me, her face pale. She had no idea I had the contract. Her lawyer was shuffling his papers, looking for something that wasn't there. "Finally, Your Honor," I said, reaching for the small digital recorder George had given me. "Miss McMillan claims she is acting in good faith. This is an audio recording of a closed-session meeting of the Architectural Review Committee, held after she received my certified letter. I have a sworn affidavit from a committee member, Mr. George Peterson, who is present in this courtroom, attesting to its authenticity." Brenda's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Improper foundation. We don't know what that is." "Then perhaps we should listen," the judge said, her voice like ice. "Mr. Vance, please play the relevant portion." I pressed the button. Brenda's voice filled the quiet courtroom, tinny and sharp from the small speaker. "Even if we're on shaky ground, the cost to fight us in court will be more than he's willing to pay. We'll bury him in legal fees. He'll give up." A heavy silence fell over the room. The mask was gone. The performance was over. All that was left was the raw, ugly truth of her malice, echoing in the air. The judge stared at Brenda, her eyes narrowed. Brenda looked small in her chair, all the righteous indignation drained out of her. She looked like what she was, a fraud. Judge Carmichael slowly removed her glasses. She looked at Brenda's lawyer. "Counselor," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "are you aware of the penalties for filing a frivolous lawsuit and attempting to commit a fraud upon the court?" The young lawyer swallowed hard. "Your Honor, my client—" "I suggest you have a conversation with your client," the judge interrupted. "A very brief one. You have 5 minutes to withdraw this petition for a restraining order and the underlying lawsuit with prejudice. If you do not, I will not only dismiss it myself, but I will also be referring this matter to the State Bar for a professional conduct investigation and to the District Attorney's Office for a review of potential perjury and conspiracy charges against your client. Your 5 minutes start now." The verdict was swift and brutal. Brenda's lawyer practically ran to his client, and after a frantic, whispered conversation, he stood and formally withdrew the entire case. The judge granted the withdrawal and then looked at me. "Mr. Vance, you are free to go, and for what it's worth, sir, that is the most well-prepared and professionally presented pro-SE case I have ever seen in this courtroom. Good day." She banged her gavel, and it was over. The collapse was total. Brenda sat frozen in her chair as her lawyer packed his briefcase, refusing to even look at her. Her supporters in the gallery were slipping out the side door, their faces a mixture of shock and embarrassment. George and Susan came over to me, their faces beaming. George clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, Arthur," he said. "You really did it." We walked out of the courthouse together, into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in a long time, the air in Whispering Pines felt clean. The aftermath was a cascade of consequences, each one a direct result of the evidence presented in that courtroom. The news of the hearing spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The audio recording was the most damning part. The quote, "We'll bury him in legal fees," became Brenda's political epitaph. Her power, which was built entirely on a performance of authority and a belief in her own invincibility, evaporated overnight. The first thing that happened was a special emergency meeting of the HOA board. Susan, the treasurer, called for it. With the evidence of the unapproved $10,000 contract and the recording of her admitted malice, the other board members who had once been her loyal followers turned on her. They were terrified of the legal exposure she had created. They weren't just facing a lawsuit from me. They were facing liability for her actions. They voted, unanimously this time, to remove her as president. They then voted to rescind all fines levied against me and issue a formal, written apology. But I wasn't finished. On the advice of an actual attorney I consulted after the hearing, I sent a new letter. This one was a demand for payment. I billed the HOA for my time preparing my legal defense, calculated at the standard rate for an expert consultant in my field. I billed them for the cost of the certified plat map, the court filing fees I had incurred, and the public records requests. The total came to $7,450. I gave them 30 days to pay, after which I would file a lien against the HOA's assets. They paid it in 2 weeks. I kept the receipt. Brenda's problems were only just beginning. The demolition contractor, upon learning from the new board that his contract was invalid and that the work would have involved trespassing on private land, sent Brenda a bill for his mobilization costs and lost time. When she refused to pay, he sued her personally. The judge's referral to the district attorney's office also bore fruit. While they declined to press perjury charges, citing the high bar for proving intent in a withdrawn civil case, they did open an investigation into financial mismanagement of the HOA. That investigation is, as I understand it, still ongoing. She sold her house 6 months later at a loss and moved away. I don't know where she went and I don't care. The community began to heal. The new HOA board, led by Susan, went through the bylaws with a fine-toothed comb. They rescinded every one of Brenda's ambiguously worded aesthetic guidelines. They held open meetings and solicited feedback from the residents. Fines became a last resort, not a first-line weapon. People started talking to each other again. The swing set down the street went back up. George started coiling his garden hose any way he pleased. The atmosphere of fear was replaced by one of quiet, neighborly respect. It turned out that property values weren't protected by tyranny, but by simple decency. I became something of a reluctant local hero. Neighbors would wave as they drove by. Some would stop to thank me. They saw it as a victory of the little guy against a bully. I suppose in a way it was. But for me it was something quieter. It was the simple, satisfying confirmation of a lifelong principle, that reality is what is written down. It was about the triumph of the recorded fact over the confident assertion. It was about the power of a well-organized binder. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit on my back porch, in the same spot where I stood that morning, and I look out at the workshop. It stands there, solid and unmoved, nestled among the pines. It looks just the same as it always has. But to me, it's different. It's no longer just a building of wood and stone. It's a monument to order, a testament to the fact that lines on a map matter. A key to a lock, a deed to a property, a rule in a book. These are not just pieces of paper. They are the invisible walls that allow us to live together in peace. They are the foundation of a civil society. Brenda thought rules were things you could invent to suit your needs. She had no idea that the real rules, the ones that last, are the ones that are discovered, not declared. I recently framed a copy of that certified plat map. I hung it on the wall in my office, right next to my engineering license and a photograph of Eleanor. It's a reminder that peace is not a passive state. Sometimes it must be defended. And the best way to defend it is not with shouting or with anger, but with quiet preparation, with meticulous documentation, and with an unshakable faith in the power of the truth on paper. I keep the receipts, because the receipts are the story. And in the end, the story with the best documentation is the one that wins. The quiet has returned to my home. It's a good kind of quiet now. It's the sound of order restored,